You know the tune. You've sung it countless times, holding hands in a circle, spinning until you're dizzy, waiting for that final moment to collapse into the grass. Ring around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies. It seems like a simple, innocent relic of childhood. But at some point, the illusion was broken. Someone told you the real meaning. They leaned in and explained that this wasn't a game at all. It was a coded memory of the Black Death. The details are always the same, and they are always horrifying. The ring was the red rash that appeared on a victim's skin. The posies were flowers carried to mask the stench of rotting flesh. Ashes referred to the cremation of bodies. And that final line, "We all fall down," that was death itself, sweeping across Europe. It is a chilling, perfect explanation. It transforms a nursery rhyme into a haunting history lesson. You probably believe it right now. But here is the problem. That entire story is a complete fabrication. The ancient plague connection isn't from the Middle Ages. It didn't exist in the Victorian era. In fact, the dark theory you believe is younger than the atomic bomb. It is a modern myth that we collectively hallucinated into existence, and today we are going to expose exactly how it fooled the world. To understand why the plague story is a lie, we have to act like detectives. And the first rule of detective work is to establish a timeline. When we place the ring around the Rosie myth against the hard, unyielding timeline of history, the entire narrative doesn't just bend, it snaps in half. Let's look at the dates. The most cited origin for the rhyme is the Great Plague of London, which ravaged the city in 1665. This is the event that supposedly traumatized a generation of children so deeply that they encoded the horror into a song. But here is the critical piece of evidence that usually gets left out of the terrifying retelling. The first time Ring Around the Rosie appears in print, the very first written record of it in the English language is in 1881. It appeared in Kate Greenaway's Mother Goose, a delicate collection of nursery rhymes for Victorian children. Open this book, and you are not met with grim reapers or death carts. You enter a world of pastoral, idealized innocence. Greenaway was famous across England for her romanticized portrayals of childhood. Her pages are filled with watercolor illustrations of children in pristine bonnets and sailor suits, playing in sun-dappled English gardens. The illustration accompanying the rhyme shows exactly what she heard children singing. A group of happy toddlers holding hands, circling a flowering rose bush. There are no sneezes. There are no ashes. There are no symptoms of necrotic flesh. The lyrics she recorded read, "Ring a ring, O roses, a pocket full of posies. Hush, 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 we're all tumbled down." Greenaway was recording the games of her own Victorian childhood. She presented it exactly as she understood it, a simple game where children fell down laughing, not dying. And this is where the illusion shatters. 1881 is a full 216 years after the Great Plague of 1665. Think about that gap for a moment. That is a span of time longer than the entire history of the United States as an independent nation up to the Cold War. For us to believe the plague theory, we have to accept a premise that borders on the impossible. We have to believe that children and only children preserved a specific, coded memory of a specific disease outbreak through oral tradition for over 2 centuries, passing it down from playground to playground, generation after generation, without a single adult ever noticing, writing it down, or commenting on its dark meaning. The silence is deafening, and it is suspicious. Between 1665 and 1881, England went through the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the rise of the Victorian Empire. It was an era of obsessive documentation. By the 19th century, folklore collectors were scouring the British countryside, desperate to write down every song, every riddle, and every superstition before modernity wiped them out. These were men and women whose entire careers depended on finding hidden meanings in old traditions. If there had been a common song about the Black Death being sung in every village square, they would have pounced on it. They would have analysed it. They would have catalogued it. Yet, in thousands of diaries, letters, almanacs, and folklore collections from that 200-year window, Ring Around the Rosie is completely absent. It simply wasn't there. If the rhyme actually existed during the plague years, the silence becomes even more inexplicable because the people of 1665 were not keeping secrets. They were documenting their apocalypse in excruciating detail. Take Samuel Pepys, the most famous diarist of the age. Pepys was a man who wrote down everything. He wrote about the political maneuvering of the king's court, but he also wrote about the stain on his coat, the meal he ate for lunch, and the argument he had with his wife. When the plague hit London, Pepys didn't look away. He stared right into the abyss and took notes. On June 7th, 1665, he wrote by candlelight, "This day, much against my will, I did in Drury Lane see 2 or 3 houses marked with a red cross upon the doors, and Lord have mercy upon us writ there." He catalogued the horror with a journalist's eye. He wrote about the death carts rumbling through the empty cobblestone streets at dawn because there were too many bodies to bury during the day. He described the plague pits at Aldgate where corpses were stacked like cordwood. He described the specific smell of vinegar used to wash coins, the bonfires lit in the streets to cleanse the air, and the mass exodus of the nobility fleeing to their country estates. Pepys was obsessed with how the city was reacting to death. He even noted the behavior of children, how they were kept indoors, how they wore lucky amulets, how they were rushed past infected houses by terrified nurses. Yet, in all these thousands of pages of meticulous, obsessive observation, not once does he mention children singing about roses. Not once does he mention a game where they fall down. Daniel Defoe, who wrote A Journal of the Plague Year, chronicled the disaster in even more vivid detail. Medical practitioners of the time recorded every symptom, every strange behavior, every folk remedy. They wrote about the swelling of the lymph nodes, the buboes, the dark blotches on the skin, the delirium. They recorded the street cries of "Bring out your dead." But somehow, we are supposed to believe that amidst all this documentation, literally everyone failed to mention the creepy nursery rhyme the children were singing in the streets. The coded language argument falls apart here too. Why would children need a code to talk about the plague? The plague wasn't a secret government conspiracy. It was a biological reality happening in their living rooms. Death was everywhere. People spoke about it openly, prayed about it loudly, and screamed about it in the streets. The idea that children would need to disguise their trauma behind metaphors of roses and posies applies a modern sensitivity to a 17th century reality. Children in 1665 wouldn't have needed a metaphor for death. They were stepping over it on their doorsteps. Furthermore, the Rosie and posies imagery doesn't even fit the medical reality of the time. The Great Plague was the bubonic plague. It caused painful, swollen buboes in the groin and armpits purple and black, not rosy red rashes. The pocket full of posies is often explained as herbs carried to ward off the miasma or bad air. While it is true that people carried nosegays and pomanders, the rhyme doesn't describe people frantically clutching herbs to survive. It describes a pocket full of flowers, a carefree image of gathering blooms in a field, not a desperate medical intervention. The historical record is clear. The rhyme does not appear during the Black Death, 1347. It does not appear during the Great Plague, 1665. It does not appear in the 1700s. It waits until the late Victorian era, a time of peace and distinct sentimentalism toward childhood, to finally emerge. The timeline forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. The history we have attached to this rhyme is a ghost. It is a phantom history inserted into a gap where no evidence exists. We have taken a rhyme from the 1880 seconds and forcibly dragged it back 2 centuries to make it fit a narrative we find compelling. But if the plague connection wasn't there from the beginning, then who put it there? And more importantly, when? The answer to that is shockingly recent. The dark interpretation you've been told, the one that seems so perfectly logical, so hauntingly appropriate, is not ancient folklore. It is an invention younger than color television. If the timeline provides our alibi, the forensic evidence provides the acquittal. To truly understand why the plague story is a fabrication, we must look beyond the dates and examine the rhyme itself, the confession encoded in the lyrics. When we treat the song as a witness statement, dragging it under the harsh light of historical scrutiny, Every single line of the plague interpretation falls apart. Let's start with the most chilling piece of evidence in the prosecutor's case, the line, ashes, ashes. In the popular retelling, this is the slam dunk. We are told, with absolute certainty, that ashes refers to the cremation of bodies during the height of the Black Death. It paints a horrifying picture of bonfires, consuming the dead because the graveyards were full. It is visceral, it is terrifying, and, historically speaking, it is absolute nonsense. Cremation was not a practice in 17th century England. In fact, it was essentially illegal and deeply taboo. England, in 1665, was a devoutly Christian society that believed in the physical resurrection of the body. To burn a corpse was to deny that person their chance at eternal life. It was considered a desecration, something reserved for heretics or witches, not the tragic victims of disease. When we look at the actual records from the plague years, the bills of mortality, and the parish registers, we don't find orders for mass cremations. We find orders for mass burials. The plague pits of Aldgate and Tothill Fields were just that, pits. The bodies were stacked, covered in quicklime to hasten decomposition and mask the smell, and buried under feet of earth. The Great Fire of London, which followed the plague in 1666, did burn down the city, but it wasn't a sanitary measure to burn bodies. It was an accidental catastrophe. So, if the rhyme dates back to the plague, why would children be singing about ashes in a society that never burned its dead? The answer is simple. They weren't. The word ashes is a modern corruption. When we go back to the archives and look at the versions of the rhyme collected in the 19th century, the word ashes is almost entirely absent. In Kate Greenaway's 1881 version, the children sing, "Hush, hush, hush, hush," a command to be silent before falling down. In other regional versions collected by folklorists, the children sang, "A tishu," mimicking a sneeze, or hither, thither, or even redbird, bluebird. The sneezing variation often gives the plague theorists hope. Aha, they say. Sneezing was a symptom of the plague. But even this is medically shaky. The Great Plague of 1665 was primarily bubonic plague, characterized by fever, headaches, and the infamous buboes, swollen lymph nodes. Sneezing was not a primary symptom. While the pneumonic variant of the plague could cause coughing and sneezing, it was the bubonic form that defined the epidemic. If children were going to document the disease, they wouldn't focus on a sneeze. They would focus on the terrifying black swellings that killed you in 48 hours. But the most damning evidence against the plague theory comes from the highest authority in the land, the Library of Congress. The American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress has spent decades preserving and analyzing the oral traditions of the world. They have access to archives that go back centuries. They have traced the genealogy of Ring Around the Rosie with the precision of geneticists mapping DNA. Their verdict? The plague connection is folklore about folklore. In the eyes of serious scholars, the debate isn't even a debate. It is a closed case. The Library of Congress states bluntly that the plague interpretation did not begin to appear until the mid-20th century. Think about what that means. We have records of the rhyme from the 1880 seconds, the 1890 seconds, the 1900s, the 1910 seconds, and the 1920 seconds. We have scholarly articles about the rhyme from those decades discussing its origins, and in all that time, no one mentions the Black Death. It wasn't that the connection was lost and then rediscovered. It simply didn't exist. To believe the plague story, you have to believe that for 300 years, millions of children sang a song about the Black Death, and millions of adults heard them, but not a single person thought to write down, "By the way, this is about the plague," until the era of Elvis Presley. So, why does the rhyme vary so much if it's supposed to be a rigid historical record? Folklorists call this regional mutation. In some versions found in 19th century America, the lyrics were, "Ring around the ring-a-ree, just beneath the coconut tree. 1, 2, 3. Look at the squirrel climbing the tree." In this version, is the coconut tree a metaphor for the gallows? Is the squirrel a symbol of the rats that carried the fleas? Of course not. It's just a nonsense rhyme designed to support a game. The lyrics changed because children changed lyrics to fit their environment. If the rhyme was a sacred, coded memory of a traumatic event, the wording would likely be more preserved, frozen in the amber of tragedy. Instead, it was fluid, playful, and nonsensical. The final witness against the myth is the rest of Europe. Ring Around the Rosie isn't unique to the English-speaking world. It belongs to a massive family of European circle games. In Germany, children sang Ringle, Ringle, Raya and sat down shush under an elderberry bush. In the Netherlands, they sang about rose wreaths. In Venice, they sang about the Gira, Gira Rosa. If the English version is about the Great Plague of London in 1665, why were German children in 1796 singing a translation of it? Did they import the trauma of the London Plague? Or, and this is the far more likely explanation, was there a common pan-European game about dancing in circles and falling down that predated the plague entirely? The evidence paints a clear picture. The ashes aren't cremation. The ring isn't a rash. The timeline doesn't fit. The medical symptoms don't match. And the archives are silent. We are left with a smoking gun, but it points in the opposite direction. The plague story wasn't a memory passed down from the 1600s. It was a lie invented in the 1900s. And unlike the rhyme, which drifted and changed over centuries, we can pinpoint exactly when and where this lie was born. We can name the father of the myth. He wasn't a survivor of the Black Death. He was a man with a typewriter, a deadline, and a flair for the dramatic. If the plague theory is a crime scene, we have cleared the suspect, the nursery rhyme itself, of all charges. It was innocent. But that leaves a massive unanswered question hanging in the air. If the rhyme isn't about the plague, and if no one in history thought it was about the plague for 300 years, then where on earth did this story come from? Usually, with folklore, origins are murky. They dissolve into the mists of time, impossible to trace. But this specific myth is different. This myth has a birth certificate. We can pinpoint the exact moment it entered the bloodstream of our culture. We can name the year, the book, and the man responsible. The year was 1961. The man was James Leeser. Leeser was not a folklorist. He was not a historian of the 17th century. He was not an academic researcher spending his days dusting off parish records in the basement of the British Museum. James Leeser was a thriller writer, a popular novelist best known for writing spy fiction and car mysteries. He was a storyteller, not a scholar. In 1961, he published a non-fiction book titled The Plague and the Fire. It was a dramatic, fast-paced retelling of London's double catastrophe of 1665 and 1666. It was designed to sell paperbacks, not to advance historical understanding. And in this book, Leeser did something that would change playground history forever. In a casual paragraph, almost as a throwaway thought, Leeser brought up Ring Around the Rosie. He suggested that the rhyme might have its roots in the Great Plague. He mentioned the Rosie as the rash, the posies as the herbs, and the sneezing as the final symptom. Crucially, he provided no footnote. He cited no primary source. He offered no diary entry from 1665 to back it up. He simply tossed it out there as a piece of interesting trivia, likely something he had heard at a cocktail party or invented to add flavor to his narrative. In the world of academic history, this is called speculation. But in the world of the 1960 seconds mass media, it was a spark landing in a room full of dynamite. We can actually trace the infection map of this idea. Before 1961, you cannot find the plague interpretation in standard reference books. But after 1961, it spreads like a virus. The timing was perfect. 1965 marked the 300th anniversary of the Great Plague. Newspapers and magazines were hungry for content to commemorate the date. Journalists, looking for a hook, found Leeser's book. They saw the Ring Around the Rosie connection and thought, wow, that's a great story. It's dark, it's ironic, and it's shocking. They reprinted it. But they made one fatal change. They removed the word might. This is how the game of telephone corrupts history. Leeser wrote that the rhyme could be connected to the plague. The magazine articles that cited him wrote that the rhyme was connected to the plague. By the late 1960 seconds, the story had jumped from magazines to encyclopedias. By the 1,970 seconds, it was in teachers' guides. In less than 15 years, a completely unsubstantiated guess by a thriller writer had solidified into historical fact. This phenomenon is what academics call metafolklore. Metafolklore is folklore about folklore. It happens when a false story about a tradition becomes more popular than the tradition itself. The Ring Around the Rosie plague story is the ultimate example of this. The rhyme is real folklore, an innocent game passed down by children. The explanation is fake folklore, a modern myth passed down by adults who want to sound smart. It is fascinating to watch how quickly the myth armored itself against criticism. Once the idea took hold, people began to retroactively fix the rhyme to make it fit the story better. Remember the ashes debate? That version of the line became significantly more dominant in the late 20th century after the plague myth became popular. We literally changed the lyrics of the song to match the fake history we had just invented. We see this happen in real time with the sneezing variation. In the early 1900s, a tissue was just a sound effect for falling down. By the 1,970 seconds, children were being told by their teachers, "We say a tissue," because that was the final sign of life before the plague victim died. The myth didn't just explain the rhyme, it actively reshaped it. This is why the myth is so hard to kill. It feels old. It feels ancient. When you hear it, it resonates with a kind of deep, ancestral truth. You think, of course, that explains everything. It satisfies our brain's desire for patterns. It connects a trivial object, a nursery rhyme, with a monumental event, the Black Death, making the trivial object feel heavy and significant. But the reality is that the dark secret of Ring Around the Rosie is younger than the Beatles. It is younger than NASA. If you asked your great-grandmother in 1920 what the rhyme meant, she wouldn't have whispered about the Black Death. She would have told you it was a game about dancing with flowers. James Leeser likely had no idea what he was starting. He was just writing a book. But he became the patient zero of the most successful piece of fake history in the English-speaking world. He proved that you don't need centuries of tradition to create a legend. You just need a catchy lie, a willing audience, and a little bit of darkness. So, if the rhyme isn't about the plague, what were all those children actually singing about for the last 200 years? If we strip away the rotting corpses, the ashes, and the grim reaper, what is left? The answer is something far more human, far more relatable, and to the strict moral guardians of the Victorian era, perhaps even more scandalous than a disease. The rhyme wasn't about death, it was about sex. So, if we scrub away the grime of the plague myth, what is underneath? If the rhyme wasn't a funeral dirge sung by traumatized orphans, what was it? The answer is both simpler and, in its own way, far more fascinating. It wasn't a game about the end of life. It was a game about the beginning of life. To understand Ring Around the Rosie, you have to step out of the hospital ward and into the village green. You have to transport yourself to the social world of the 19th century, specifically the strict, religious communities of England and America. Imagine a Methodist church social in 1883. The rules of society were rigid. In many of these communities, dancing was strictly forbidden. The ministers preached that dancing was the devil's work. It led to moral corruption, unseemly passions, and the dangerous, unregulated touching of bodies between unmarried young people. The fiddle was considered a wicked instrument. The waltz was a scandal. But humans, especially young humans, have an irrepressible need to flirt. So, the youth found a loophole. They invented the play party. They couldn't dance, that was a sin. But they could play games. And if those games just happened to involve holding hands, forming circles, and singing together, well, that was just innocent fun. Ring Around the Rosie was one of these games. It was a courtship ritual disguised as child's play. Let's reconstruct the scene as it actually happened. Based on the descriptions from 19th century folklorists like William Wells Newell, the ring is simply the circle of dancers. The Rosie is the person standing in the center, the rose of the game. Picture the scene. It is a summer evening. A group of teenagers old enough to be interested in each other, but too young to court openly gather on the grass. They choose a girl to stand in the center. Let's call her Mary. She is the Rosie. The boys and girls join hands around her, their palms touching, a rare electric contact in a buttoned-up society. They begin to circle, singing the familiar melody. Ring around the Rosie. They are admiring the girl in the center. The pocket full of posies? These weren't herbs to ward off the smell of death. They were exactly what they sound like, small bouquets of flowers. In the Victorian language of flowers, a posy was a gift you gave to a sweetheart. It was a symbol of affection, not protection. Then comes the climax. Hush, 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 hush. The circle slows down. The laughter dies away. The anticipation builds. We all fall down. At this moment, everyone in the circle drops to the ground. But this isn't a representation of sudden death. It is a stoop, a curtsy, or a deep bow. It is a gesture of submission and deference to the rose in the center. And here is the part the modern myth leaves out, the part that explains everything. The game didn't end when they fell down. That was just the setup for the forfeit. In many versions of the game, the person who was the slowest to fall down, or the person the Rosie pointed to, had to pay a penalty. And what was the penalty? They had to reveal the name of their sweetheart. Or, in the more daring versions of the game, they had to stand up and kiss the person in the center. Suddenly, the ashes and sneezing make sense in a completely different context. A tissue wasn't a symptom of the plague. It was a mimicry of flirting, a playful noise to break the tension. Hush was a command for silence, so the lovers could have a moment. The falling down was the excuse to scramble on the grass, to be close to one another, to laugh and tumble in a way that wasn't allowed in the stiff parlors of their parents' houses. It was a game of romantic musical chairs. It was Tinder for the 1800s. The forensic evidence supports this joyful interpretation perfectly. Look at the illustration by Jessie Wilcox Smith from 1912. It shows children in their Sunday best, in a sunny meadow, playing a game. There is no darkness here. There is only light. When we look at our international witnesses again, their testimony now lines up perfectly. Remember the Venetian children singing Gira Gira Rosa? In their version, the game ended with the children rushing to the center to kiss the rose. In the Swiss version, they danced around a rose bush in the town square to celebrate the arrival of spring. In the German version, the children sitting under the elderberry bush weren't dying. They were playing house, scattering like birds when the song ended. These were all variations of the same ancient pagan celebration of nature, fertility, and spring. The ring is the cycle of the seasons. The rose is the blooming of life. The fall is the return to the earth, or the curtsy to the beauty of the center. It is a story of absolute innocence and burgeoning romance. It is about the thrill of holding a crush's hand for the first time. It is about the smell of crushed grass and wild roses on a warm afternoon. So, we have a choice between two stories. Story A. A grim, terrifying, secret history of the Black Death, which has zero evidence to support it, contradicts the timeline, defies medical science, and was invented by a thriller writer in 1961. Story B. A verified historical tradition of courtship and play, supported by written records, consistent with the social customs of the time, and corroborated by similar games all over Europe. The truth is obvious. The Rosie is a girl, not a rash. The posies are gifts, not medicine. The fall is a curtsy, not a corpse. But this brings us to the final, and perhaps most uncomfortable question. If the truth is so lovely, if it is a story of romance and sunshine and history, why do we hate it? Why did we collectively decide to throw away the courtship theory and embrace the plague theory with such enthusiasm? Why does the lie feel so much more satisfying than the truth? The answer lies not in history, but in psychology. We didn't choose the darkness because we were tricked. We chose it because we wanted it. The evidence is in. The timeline is impossible, the medical data is wrong, and the true meaning is a documented game of innocent courtship. Yet, I am willing to bet that the next time you hear this rhyme, you won't think about daffodils or teenage crushes. You will think about the plague. Why? Why does a lie invented by a thriller writer in 1961 hold more power over our collective imagination than centuries of actual history? The answer lies in the strange, dark corners of human psychology. We didn't fall for the plague myth because we are gullible. We fell for it because we are addicted to darkness. In the late 20th century, as the myth took hold, pop culture weaponized it. Hollywood realized that nothing is scarier than corrupted innocence. The image of a child in a white nightgown, singing softly about death while holding a doll, became a staple of horror. Think of A Nightmare on Elm Street. The movies took the bouncing, rhythmic tempo of the playground and slowed it down. They dropped the pitch. They added an echo. Suddenly, Ring Around the Rosie wasn't a song for skipping. It was a funeral dirge. It became the soundtrack for Freddy Krueger. Video games like Dead Space and BioShock used it to chill the blood of players. By placing the rhyme next to imagery of gore and destruction, they reinforced the connection. The lie became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because we believed it was a song about death, we used it in scenes about death, which convinced a new generation that it was, in fact, a song about death. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the myth exploded again. Social media was flooded with memes claiming that history was repeating itself. People shared the plague interpretation as if it were a prophetic warning from the past. It gave them a strange sense of comfort. It meant that we had been here before. It meant that even in the darkest times, we made art out of our suffering, and that is the core of the seduction. We love the plague theory because it grants significance to the mundane. If Ring Around the Rosie is just a game about flowers, it is trivial. It is just noise children make. But if it is a coded message about the Black Death, suddenly it is an artifact. It is a survivor's testimony. It turns every child on a playground into an unwitting historian, carrying the weight of the past in their small hands. It makes us feel smart to know the secret. There is a rush of dopamine when you lean across a dinner table and say, "Actually, did you know that song is about the bubonic plague?" It makes you an insider. It separates you from the sheep who just hear a nursery rhyme. It transforms you into a decoder of hidden truths. But there is something even deeper at play here. The historian Catriona Hazel suggests that we cling to these dark origins because we want our ancestors to be darker and grittier than they actually were. We fetishize the misery of the past. We have trouble accepting that people in the 17th or 19th centuries had moments of pure, unadulterated joy. We want their history to be a horror movie because it validates our own modern anxieties. The plague myth is what scholars call fakeolore. Unlike real folklore, which grows organically like a tree, fakeolore is manufactured like plastic. It is designed to fit a specific need in the present. In the terrifying atomic age of the 1960 seconds, when the myth was born, perhaps we needed a story about how humanity survived the end of the world. We needed to believe that even if we all fell down, we would keep singing. So, where does that leave us? The Ring Around the Rosie, is a lie. But it is a fascinating lie. It is a monument to how easily history can be rewritten if the new story is catchier than the truth. The real history of the rhyme is a story of life. It is about Victorian teenagers finding a way to touch hands in a world that told them not to. It is about German children playing under elderberry bushes. It is about the resilience of joy. But the myth of the rhyme is a story about us. It is a mirror reflecting our obsession with tragedy, our desire for hidden patterns, and our refusal to let a simple song just be a simple song. We have taken a bouquet of posies and turned them into funeral flowers. We have taken a curtsy and turned it into a corpse. And even now that you know the truth, even now that you know James Lisa made it up in 1961, a small part of you probably still prefers the lie. And that is the scariest truth of all. In the end, the story of Ring Around the Rosie teaches us something far more valuable than a fake history lesson about the plague. It teaches us about the fragility of truth. It shows us that history isn't just what happened. History is what we choose to remember. And sometimes, what we choose to remember is a ghost story invented by a paperback novelist in 1961. We took a celebration of spring, of courtship, and of the simple, chaotic joy of being a child, and we paved over it with a nightmare. We did it because the nightmare felt heavier, it felt deeper, it felt realer than happiness. But now, you know the secret behind the secret. You know that when those children in the Victorian illustrations were spinning in the grass, they weren't acting out a tragedy. They were just playing. The only ghosts in the circle are the ones we put there ourselves. So, the next time you hear that familiar, sing-song melody drifting from a playground or echoing in a horror movie trailer, I want you to remember James Lisa. Remember the 200-year silence. Remember the curtsy. And remember that sometimes a pocket full of posies is just a pocket full of posies. But this brings us to a final, lingering question. If we were this wrong about the most famous nursery rhyme in the English language, what else are we wrong about? What about London Bridge is falling down? Is that really about a Viking attack? Or, as some darker theories suggest, about the ancient practice of immurement, burying children alive in the foundations of bridges to keep them standing? Or is that just another myth we tell ourselves to make the world feel more mysterious? I'm currently digging into the archives to find the answer to that one, and the results are, well, let's just say they are complicated. If you want to be there when we decode that mystery, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. And right now, I want to hear from you in the comments. How old were you when you were told the plague lie? Who told it to you? A teacher? A parent? That one friend who knew everything? Let me know below. Let's see just how far this virus really spread. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep questioning the history you think you know.